Okay, so now we can take a look at font metrics here. So the way that we get, and the font metrics I mentioned before is another class that we can use to get all kinds of interesting measurements on our string with given a certain font. So the way we get to it is kind of roundabout, because the font metrics object itself it depends on the font, right? It makes sense. The measurements are going to depend on the font, but ultimately the way that you get to a font or get to the font metrics is through the graphics context that you're in. So the graphics context is basically just a whole bunch of different information about the graphics, just a whole bunch of different graphics information that's held in Java. So to get to the graphics context, you have to go into Greenfoot image and call this method right here, this get AWT image. Okay, so what that does is that gives you, and notice this is not a static method, so you need to have an actual Greenfoot image object that you're working with to get the AWT image. And this returns the buffered image that backs the Greenfoot image. So a buffered image, the important thing to know about that is that it's it's in the java.awt.image package. So it's part of the Java AWT stuff. And if you go into that, if you retrieve that buffered image that's associated with your Greenfoot image, then it'll give you this get graphics method that returns the graphics object. Okay, so here we're in buffered image, and that gets you your graphics. So, and then once you get your graphics object, so let's go to there again. Let's see, get graphics. Once you get your graphics object, so it returns a graphics object. Once you get your graphics object, then you can get font metrics from there. Okay, so that gets the font metrics of the current font. Okay, and see here, okay, this gets the font metrics of the current font. This gets the font metrics for the specified font. So we're specifying our font up front, right? We're setting our font. So we have our font object. So that's what we're going to use for our font metrics. Okay, so that's kind of long and roundabout, but I'll show you what that looks like when we actually have our image. So basically, we want to do something kind of like this, and I'm going to put it up here just so it'll be close. So let's make it private font metrics get metrics. Okay, and well, for now, let's trying to think how I want to do this, because we need a Greenfoot image object for this to work. So you know what I'm going to do? Hold on, I'm going to make a new Greenfoot image object, and I'm going to call it canvas. And the canvas is going to be what we're going to draw on, because right now what we do is we start with a background image in our update, right? And well, we may or may not use the background image, depending, right? But we have this thing, this image thing here, right? And we draw everything on the image. So I'm going to change that and call it canvas, so we get the idea more that that's what we're drawing everything on. And it's going to be an instance variable, so I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to say canvas, and instead of calling it image, I'm calling it canvas. I'm going to do this. Okay. And now, we need to import font metrics, right? So I'm going to import that. And it's missing a return statement. Of course it is. So let's say so the roundabout way of getting to the font metrics is we start with the Greenfoot image. That's going to be our canvas. Then we say get AWT image, okay, and that gets the buffered image that's in the background of the canvas, okay. And once we have that AWT thing, that buffered image, we can get the graphics context, which has all kinds of information about the all kinds of graphics information in it, including the font metrics. And we can get the font metrics for the font that we're working with. Okay, so let's see if that compiles. Okay, that compiles. We want to check though. Let's make sure, just to be safe, that we actually have a font. We should have one, right? Because we put it in a constructor. But if the font is null or if the canvas is null, then this stuff isn't going to work, is it? If the canvas is null, then we can't call any methods on it. We'll get a null pointer exception. So if either of these is the case, if the font is null or the canvas is null, we'll just return null right away. Otherwise, we'll get our metrics. Okay, so let's compile that. All right, so now with these metrics, we can get all kinds of interesting things. Specifically, what we need to do the centering stuff is the height and the width of the string, right? So let's do string height first. String height's pretty easy. Private int string height. I'm being lazy about comments at this point because I just don't want these videos to go on too long, but it is good practice to stick in these comments to explain what these methods do. But here I'm just going to say, I'm going to start with font metrics metrics equals get metrics, because I only want to do this if metrics is not null, right? Because remember here I could pass back a null. So if metrics is null, then I'm going to return, well, what's a reasonable value? I have to return an int. I can't return null because that's not an int. So I'll just use my old standby, my integer min value, to mean, a no good value. And then I'll say, I mean, you could use like a -1 or something like that. You just have to be consistent with what you're using for your int. And so metrics has a lot of different methods having to do with size. There's one, this is not font metrics, is it? There's one called getAscent, which determines the font ascent of the font described by font metrics. And actually, it's worth Googling this stuff some more and figuring out, where this is your baseline and where the ascent is and all that stuff. But basically, I'm using ascent to tell me how tall the font is. Let's see if that's reasonable. Determines the font ascent. The font ascent is the distance from the font's baseline to the top of most alphanumeric characters. Some characters in the font might extend above the ascent line. And there's get max ascent and things like that. So you might decide after you've been playing around with this that there are other, you might want to use get max ascent, or you can look through it and see what other things there are. But I'm going to use get ascent to tell me the height of my characters, and just for purposes of centering. And let's see, for string width. Now notice for string height, I don't need any input parameters. It doesn't matter what string I'm using, because we're dealing with the height of letters, which doesn't change no matter how many letters you use. The general height is going to be the same, right? But with width, we do care. At least, for the purposes of what I'm doing, this is sufficient for string height. You might decide, well, I'm going to have, if I have all lowercase letters, then I might want to do something different as far as centering. That's up to you. But this is I'm considering this sufficient for what I'm doing. So again, it's the same basic idea as to begin with. We have to get the metrics and check and see if they're there. But the method to check the width of a string in font metrics is string width. So that's font metrics, string width. Okay, that's this guy. Alright, so it returns the total advanced width for showing the string in this font. The advanced width is the distance from the leftmost point to the rightmost point on the string's baseline. Okay. So that's what I'm using for that. So let's see if that compiles. Yep. Okay. So now I have, it looks like I have a reasonable way of getting at the width and the height of a string. I'm going to tack on one more private int. I want to have a string dimension. Oops, this is going to return a dimension. So a dimension is the dimension class has two variables associated with it, width and height. Okay, so I'm going to pass in a string, and what I want is I'm going to do this. I'm going to check get metrics. I just want to see if get metrics is null. So if get metrics is null, then I'm going to return null. Okay, so here I can return null because I'm looking at returning a class, or looking at returning an object, a dimension object. But if it's if metrics is not null, then I'm going to try doing return new dimension string width is going to be the width dimension. the string height is going to be the height dimension. Okay. All right. So now, oh, I gotta add that in, and that's another Java AWT guy. Again, it's a dimension. Dimension is not something you draw on the screen, but it's in AWT because it's information that's used by graphics a lot. So now I know I can access font metrics, and I can get the height and width of the string, and we'll see how we can use that to center our string. We're getting there. Hopefully in the next video we'll have our we'll get to centering.